All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Bijak,
And I'm Duncan Carranza.
and we are here to present a low prep and low stress way to get students talking about content in your class.
So to start, what we're going to ask you to do, and you can just pause the video while you do it, we're going to have you start with an icebreaker. So you can lift up your phone, turn on your phone's camera, and aim it at this QR code on the screen, and that'll take you to a quick poll about how you feel about icebreakers. When you're done with that, unpause the video and come back.
All right. Now that you're back, the first question of the day is, what is academic discourse? In Portland Public Schools, academic discourse is a structured peer-to-peer communication that occurs within a classroom. Effective discourse happens when students articulate their own ideas and seriously consider their peers' perspectives as a way to construct understanding. What is important is that students are able to process and interact with ideas and with one another using academic vocabulary.
Now, why should we focus on academic discourse? Well, because talking is integral to human learning. We know that broadening participation just beyond the kids who raise their hands in classroom discussions is an important equity issue. We know that in order to process, make sense of, and learn from their ideas, observations, and experiences, students have to talk about them. And finally, that talk forces students to think about and articulate their ideas. Talk can also provide an impetus for students to reflect on what they do and do not understand.
Thanks, Duncan. All right. How the three signature practices support academic discourse. Well, we know that we as educators can meaningfully engage in academic discourse when we know our voice matters, when we have a sense of belonging within the learning community, when we have opportunities to build strong, respectful, and lasting relationships with peers and educators, when our individual and diverse identities are affirmed and positioned as assets, when our lived experience and background are centered and validated, and finally, when our unique perspectives and ideas are validated as a learning condition.
Thanks, Bob. Our goal this morning is that at the end of this, that you will be able to distinguish between level 1, level 2, and level 3 types of questions to increase academic discourse in your classroom.
So one strategy that we believe anyone and everyone can benefit from is what we call a think, ink, pair, share, or anachronized as TIPS. So what is TIPS? Well, TIPS requires no unnecessary prep time. TIPS allows kids to write down ideas before sharing. TIPS decreases any type of risk for students if they're shy and don't want to speak. It allows them processing time and some writing time. TIPS also is a great way for students to demonstrate their understanding through visible and audible means, meaning that you can simply walk around, read, and listen to what the students are saying and writing. And then lastly, TIPS allows kids to scaffold their own learning and then to check in with one another for understanding.
Great. Then we're going to use TIPS and thinking pair share, and we're going to add that and level it up with Costa's leveled questions. And these questions are maybe very familiar to you if you're working with Avid, but they're kind of like Bloom's questions. So level 1 questions are text explicit. These are the kinds of questions where the answer is literally right there in the text. A student can put their finger on it. Level 2 questions are text implicit and require students to kind of synthesize different areas of the text in their head to come up with the answer. So more like finding the main idea or the theme of a text. Level 3 questions are experience-based and ask students to kind of move beyond the text into their real lived experience. So these questions already exist and have been written by lots of other people, so they can be pulled from already existing question banks. Both of these links are great places to get them, so I encourage you to click on those links to find great Costas leveled questions.
All right, so now what? Okay, so given what you now know about tips, and given also what you know about Costas levels of questioning, here's where you can merge the two. So merge tips and Costas questions after, then as the teacher and the reading and writing coach in the room, you can begin with level 1 questions to redirect students back to key areas of the text. So for example, you could do a tips activity and then have the students write a summary of what they just read. You could then move to level 2 questioning for general understanding of larger chunks or the main idea or the theme of the entire text, plus a tips activity. You could then, if you want to challenge the students even further, you could move to a level 3 to connect students with the real world, or things that I love like text to world, text to text, or text to self discoveries to make the learning and understanding of what they've read more relevant. And it also adds rigor to it. And then one big suggestion that we have when leveling questions and adding a tips activity, be sure that in your classroom you've built strong communities and maybe established norms about what the expectations are during such an activity.
Great. And now, after that brief intro into thinking pair share plus Costas questions, we just want to model that. So what we're going to do is we're going to read a text out loud that we think you could use with your students this next week. We will then share with you what questions we selected from the Costas leveled questions banks and just kind of briefly explain why we picked the questions that we did. After that, you will then be able to choose your own text and identify and borrow and grab questions that you would ask your students if you were going to have them read that text. So now I'd like to read to you the text that we selected for this activity. The title is called "The Thanksgiving Tale We Tell is a Harmful Lie. As a Native American, I found a better way to celebrate the holiday." Every November, I get asked an unfortunate, loaded question. "You're a Native American. What do you eat on Thanksgiving?" My answer spans my lifetime. I was born and raised on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota in the 1970s, and I'm a member of the Golala Lakota Sioux tribe. Growing up, I went to a very small country school on the reservation in the poorest county in the United States. Our school had predominantly Native students, but we were still taught what everybody was about Thanksgiving. It represented a time when pilgrims and Indians celebrated together, and it was about being thankful. Only later would we find out that it was a lie. But as I was taught this story, my family gathered on Thanksgiving at my grandparents' ranch, where we held a huge feast of very typical recipes, most of them straight out of a circa 1960s Betty Crocker cookbook. I remember the mingling smells of dishes cooking throughout the day as our moms and aunts crowded every kitchen surface, preparing for the large offering. We had the staples like roasted turkey, mashed potatoes and milk gravy, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green bean casserole with onion crisps, brand name stuffing, canned cranberry sauce, an assortment of cold pasta salads, jello molds, cookies, deviled eggs, and 1950s style glass platters filled with canned California black olives, pickles, and piles of veggies. On occasion, we had Lakota dishes like taniga, intestine soup, and wojape, choke cherry sauce. Those are good memories. Though once my grandparents passed away, my family never celebrated holidays like that again, gathered in one place on the reservation. In the years since, my perspective on Thanksgiving has changed. At first from a sense of bitterness surrounding the real history of those lies we tell, of the actual stories we should honor and mourn, and then with a renewed hope for what our celebrations could be if we simply changed our focus. It was the Wampanoag in 1621 who helped the first wave of Puritans arriving on our shores. showing them how to plant crops, forage for wild foods, and basically survive. The first official mention of a Thanksgiving celebration occurs in 1637, after the colonists brutally massacre an entire Pequot village, then subsequently celebrate their barbaric victory. Years later, President Washington first tried to start a holiday of Thanksgiving in 1789, but this has nothing to do with Indians and settlers. Instead, it's intended to be a public day of thanksgiving and prayer. That the phrase merciless savage Indians is written into the Declaration of Independence says everything we need to know about how the founders of America viewed the indigenous peoples of this land. It wasn't until the writer Sarah Josepha Hale persuaded President Lincoln that the Thanksgiving holiday was needed and could help heal the divided nation that it was made official in 1863. But even that was not the story we're all taught today. The inspiration for that was far more exclusionist. According to the 2009 book, Thanksgiving, the biography of an American holiday by James Baker, who is a researcher at Plymouth Plantation, this changed during the Progressive Era from 1890 to 1920, when the United States became a global power rife with industrialization and urbanization. It saw a rise in nationalism as European immigrants poured into the country and the Protestant Americans who'd massacred indigenous people feared being displaced. Colonial ideology became the identity of what it was to be truly American, and they began implementing teachings to clearly define Americanism for the new immigrants. One of these was the sanitized story of Thanksgiving, which fabricated a peaceful depiction between the colonizers and the tribes and neglected to mention the amount of death, destruction, and land grabbing that occurs against the first peoples, setting the tone for the next 200 years. By 1920, writes Baker, the story of Pilgrims and Indians became a story every American schoolchild was taught, even in native schools. But our families lived something different. My great-grandfather helped fight off General Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn, alongside other Lakota and Cheyenne, not even 100 years before my birth. I think about my great-grandfather's lifetime. Being born in the 1850s, toward the end of the genocides that began in the 1600s across America, and stretching into the subtler, but still damaging years of assimilation efforts we have endured since. He saw escalating conflicts between Lakota life as he knew it and the ever-emerging immigrants from the East. He witnessed the disappearance of the bison, the loss of the sacred Black Hills, the many broken promises made by the U.S., along with atrocities like the Sand Creek and Wounded Knee massacres. He saw his children attend the boarding schools where they had their hair forcibly cut and were punished for speaking their languages. I wonder what he thought about the Thanksgiving story. But I do not wonder about this. Thanksgiving really had nothing to do with Native Americans and everything to do with an old, but not the oldest guard, conjuring a lie of the first peoples welcoming the settlers to bolster their false authority over what makes a real American. Remember, only in 1924 were Native Americans allowed to become citizens of the United States, and it took decades more for all states to permit us to vote. It is a story of supposed unity, drained of the bloodshed, and built for the sake of division. Many of my indigenous brothers and sisters refuse to celebrate Thanksgiving, protesting the whitewashing of the horrors our ancestors went through, and I don't blame them. But I have not abandoned the holiday. I've just changed how I practice it. The thing is, we do not need the poisonous Pilgrims and Indians narrative. We do not need that illusion of past unity to actually unite people today. Instead, we can focus simply on values that apply to everybody: togetherness, generosity, and gratitude. And we can make the day about what everybody wants to talk and think about anyway: the food. People may not realize it, but what every person in this country shares, and the very history of this nation, has been in front of us the whole time. Most of our Thanksgiving recipes are made with indigenous foods: turkey, corn, beans, pumpkins, maple, wild rice, and the like. We should embrace this. For years, especially as the head of a company that focuses on indigenous foods, I've explored native foods. It has given me, and can give all of us, a deeper understanding of the land we stand on. It's exciting to reconnect with the nature around us. We Americans spend hours outdoors collecting foods like chanterelles, morels, ramps, wild ginger, choke cherries, wild plums, crab apples, cactus fruit, pawpaws, manzanita berries, cattails, maple, wild rice. Not the black stuff from California, which is a modified and completely different version of the true wild rice growing around the Great Lakes region. Cedar, rose hips, hickory, acorns, and walnuts. We can work with native growers producing heirloom beans, squash and pumpkins, and native corn varieties, all coming in many shapes, sizes, and colors. We can have our feasts include dishes like cedar braised rabbit, sunchokes with sumac, pine stewed venison, smoked turkey with chestnuts, true wild rice with foraged mushrooms, native squash with maple, smoked salmon, and wild teas. No matter where you are in North America, you are on indigenous land. And so on this holiday, and any day really, I urge people to explore a deeper connection to what are called American foods by understanding true Native American histories and begin using what grows naturally around us and to support Native American growers. There is no need to make Thanksgiving about a false past. It is so much better when it celebrates the beauty of the present. So now that you've heard the article read to you, here are the questions that we developed from using the Costas leveled questions that match this article. So the first two questions are level 1 questions. According to the text, what led to the first mention of Thanksgiving? And according to the text, why do other indigenous peoples refuse to celebrate Thanksgiving? Both of these questions, or the answers for both of these questions, can be found directly in the text. A student could put their finger on the text where the answer is. Questions 3 and 4 are the level 2 questions, a little more implicit. What is the central idea of the text? Explain using key evidence from the text to support your answer. And compare and contrast the author's early Thanksgivings with what he thinks Thanksgivings could be like. Again, the student will need to use the text to complete these answers, but they need to use different areas of the text to kind of synthesize a better level 2 answer. Finally, questions 5 and 6 are level 3 questions, moving beyond just what lives in the text. What is most compelling to you in this article? Why? And what do you think will happen to the way Americans celebrate Thanksgiving in the future, and why? Again, students can use the text to support an answer, but a lot of this will come from their own lived experience. It's kind of like a text-to-world connection or a text-to-self connection. So those 6 questions, again, are just examples of how you can use some of those text banks to find questions after students have read a text. Now that you've heard how we wrote the 6 questions to match the text, it's your turn to try it. So right now, please take some time and identify a text that you would use with your students in the coming weeks. Once you've selected that text, then go back to those question banks that we shared earlier and identify what questions you'd really ask your kids based on the text that you chose.
So why this technique? And perhaps why these articles? Well, we wanted this to be something meaningful for you to use in your classroom. So this product is designed to be implemented in the classroom in the next couple weeks. The product is designed to practice new learning from session 1 and designed to be actionable in the classroom. This type of activity measures student outcome to determine its effectiveness, and the products should be completed by the time they go to their PLC.
Right now, we'd also love for you to take a little bit of time and click the link in the slide to provide feedback about today's work. So again, the overall plan and implementation of this professional learning day, again, the link is there. I'm sure it will also be shared other ways, but please take some time and provide some feedback.
And to kind of close out, if you wouldn't mind pausing the video at this time and taking a picture of the QR code on your screen, just like you did at the very beginning of our presentation, Duncan and I would so appreciate it. Again, my name is Bob Bijak.
And I'm Duncan Carranza.
And we just both want to thank you all for taking the time for stopping by, listening to our professional development, and Thanksgiving, here we go.